I was a janitor in a secret Alaskan facility. The horrifying truth I uncovered: imagine being trapped in a place where the very walls breathe, where the cold is not just a temperature but a living, creeping force, and where the rules you've been told to follow are not just guidelines. They are your last chance for survival. This isn't a story about mere monsters or ghosts. This is a tale of ancient, unspeakable forces, waiting for the moment to break free and claim the world. It all started with a simple job as a janitor at a remote facility in Alaska, a place hidden in the frozen wilderness, where the only things colder than the snow outside were the secrets buried inside. But as you'll soon see, no amount of cleaning, no set of rules, no precaution could prepare anyone for what lurked in the shadows of that facility. Tonight, I will take you on a journey through one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever lived, and as we go deeper into the heart of the unknown, you'll realize that there are some places, some truths, that are never meant to be uncovered. Welcome to this chilling story from True Scary Stories. Stay with us because you're about to find out what happens when something ancient, something dark, is set free. The howl of the storm outside was deafening, like an animal, its claws scraping across the frozen earth, desperate, wild. Each gust of wind seemed to cut through the blackness, stripping away the last remnants of warmth. The snow was deep, and the frigid air bit at my exposed skin as I slogged through it. My breath came out in heavy, crystallizing clouds, instantly freezing in the 40 degrees Fahrenheit below zero night. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you question whether your very existence is a mistake. I was used to the cold by now, having been here at the facility for 3 months, but this was different. This wasn't just the cold of nature. No, this was something else entirely. Something darker. Something that felt as if it had been born from the very heart of this frozen wilderness. It was a place where time seemed to stretch and warp, where the mundane world outside didn't dare to tread. The facility, nestled far away from civilization, was hidden within the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness, where only the bravest or most foolhardy would venture. The building was a hulking, metal structure, almost invisible in the storm's fury. Only the faint glow of security lights broke through the blackness, casting strange shadows on the snow-covered ground. From the outside, it looked like a relic of a time long past. Clean, sterile, cold, frozen in both appearance and purpose. My job was simple. At least that's what I thought. I was the night janitor, responsible for maintaining the hallways and offices. A simple job, sweeping the corridors, mopping the floors, emptying the trash. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a steady paycheck. And in a place like this, that was all that mattered. But as the weeks dragged on, I started to realize that my presence here wasn't as insignificant as I had initially assumed. The facility held secrets. Secrets that were far darker than any janitorial task. And then there were the rules. The rules. They weren't just guidelines or suggestions. They were commands, etched into the very fabric of the facility. Rules that I had learned the hard way to follow, for my safety and my sanity. Disobeying them had consequences. Serious consequences. Rule number 1. If your badge changes color, leave immediately and find the nearest emergency exit. I've seen it happen before. The badge was supposed to be a simple identification tool, a way to let everyone know who you were. But once that badge changed color, once it glowed red, it was a warning. It was no longer just a piece of metal and plastic. It meant that something inside the facility was wrong. Something had gone awry. And when it did, you didn't question it, you ran. I had learned that the hard way when I saw a fellow janitor's badge flash red just before he disappeared without a trace. Rule number 2. Never enter any room marked with a red triangle, even if the lights are on and someone inside is calling for help. This rule was the most terrifying. The red triangles marked the doors of rooms where no one was supposed to go. If you saw a red triangle, you didn't approach, you didn't knock, you didn't even pause to listen to the calls for help coming from within. There was something wrong behind those doors. The whispers, the occasional glimpses of shadowy figures moving just beyond the threshold, those were things I would never forget. I had seen the aftermath of what happened when someone disregarded the red triangle. The first day I arrived, I had witnessed a man step into one of those rooms only to be dragged inside by something unseen. His screams echoed down the hallway for hours, but when they sent a team to investigate, there was nothing but an empty, blood-stained room. Rule number 3, if you see a puddle of clear liquid on the floor, do not mop it up. Mark its location and report it to Dr. Emerson in the morning. This rule always made my stomach twist. Clear liquid on the floor seemed harmless enough at first, just a spill to clean up, right? But the facility had learned that this wasn't just water or something benign. It was part of something, a biological fluid that I still didn't fully understand. Dr. Emerson, the facility's lead scientist, had drilled this rule into our heads from the moment I started. He said that this liquid was dangerous, potentially alive. Whatever it wasn't supposed to be there. I had learned to mark its location and keep my distance, but there was always a gnawing suspicion in the back of my mind. What was it? And why were we never allowed to clean it up? Rule number 4, if you hear someone call your first name, do not respond. If they call your full name, run to the nearest greenlit room and lock the door. The most frightening of them all. It was simple in its directive, but the implications were terrifying. It wasn't just that you shouldn't respond. The rule implied that if someone called your full name, it was not someone you knew. It was a sound coming from something far more insidious. It was a warning that whoever or whatever was calling your name wasn't human. I had only heard it once. The first time it happened, I froze in place, hearing my name echo through the empty hallways. James? James Nash. The voice was so familiar, so right. It sounded just like my mother, calling me from the break room. I almost responded, but then I remembered the rule. The voice came again, this time in a whisper, just behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't breathe. I simply followed the rule and ran. The first hour of my shift had passed uneventfully. The air inside the facility was freezing, and the long hallways seemed endless, stretching further than I could see. I swept, mopped, and cleaned, keeping my head down. It was just another night. But then, as I made my way down the dark corridor toward the main lab, I heard it. James? I froze, my mop dangling from my hand. My heart stopped for a split second. The voice wasn't a whisper this time, but a sharp, distinct call. A voice so real it was impossible to ignore. It was my name, but the voice came from somewhere deeper in the hallway. I turned slowly, my mind spinning. There was no one there. James? The voice called again, louder this time. It was coming from the lab. I had no choice but to follow the rule. I turned on my heel and bolted down the corridor, the sounds of my footsteps echoing off the sterile, white walls. I kept my eyes trained on the nearest greenlit room, the sanctuary that the rules promised me would keep me safe. My heart was in my throat as I ran, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I could still hear my name, but it was faint, distorted, like it was coming from a speaker. But the more I ran, the closer it seemed. James Nash, we just need your help. The voice was no longer distant. It was right behind me. I rounded the corner and slammed into the door of the greenlit room, barely managing to lock it before the echoing voice reached me. My body trembled as I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. I had followed the rules, but it didn't feel like enough. Something was wrong. Something was watching me. After the voice stopped, I began to calm down, but the unease never fully left. I glanced at the floor and saw something that made my stomach drop, a puddle of clear liquid. It wasn't there before. I knew that for sure. My eyes darted back to the door, the voice still fresh in my ears. I quickly checked my badge. It was still blue, thank God. But I couldn't ignore the liquid. I knew the rules and I knew I had to report it. But where was Dr. Emerson? Why wasn't he here to handle it? I marked the location on my map, noting the exact coordinates, just like I was supposed to. But the nagging feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. That liquid, it wasn't natural. And it wasn't supposed to be here. What was going on inside this facility? It wasn't until later that I realized I was deeper into the facility than I had ever been before. The fear didn't subside. Instead, it grew. Every corner I turned, every door I passed, I felt something creeping along my spine, watching me, waiting for me to break the rules. And then I heard it again. "James, we only need your help." But this time, the voice wasn't coming from a speaker. It was coming from the lab, and I was alone. The hum of the fluorescent lights above me became the only constant as I swept the hallways of the facility. The rhythmic sound was almost soothing in its monotony, like a pulse that kept the sterile, cold environment alive. The floor beneath me felt unyielding, hard, yet it seemed to absorb every step, every squeak of my rubber-soled shoes. I didn't mind. I preferred the silence, the isolation. After all, I had grown accustomed to being alone, the only sound the soft swish of my mop and the occasional scrape of a broom against the tile. There wasn't much to do on a night shift in a place like this. My job kept me confined to certain parts of the building, mainly the labs and the storage rooms. I wasn't allowed to go near the higher security areas where the scientists worked, where the real action took place. That suited me just fine. All I had to do was clean up the messes left behind, empty the trash, wipe down counters. It was mundane, dull work that required little thought. But the longer I worked there, the more I realized how wrong everything felt. The place was too quiet, too lifeless, like an abandoned mausoleum of human endeavor. And then there were the rules. I had followed them religiously. The rules were there for a reason, or so I believed. But tonight, something was different. The air was thick with a tension I hadn't noticed before, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. It was as if the building itself was watching me, aware of my every movement, every hesitation. I brushed it off as my imagination running wild, but the gnawing sensation only grew as the minutes ticked by. I moved down the hallway, turning a corner to find myself in one of the quieter sections of the building. The hum of the lights seemed louder here, the sound of my mop hitting the floor too sharp, too intrusive. I was beginning to wish I were somewhere else. That's when I heard it. A voice. It wasn't a loud voice, more like a faint whisper, barely audible, as if it were coming from the walls themselves. "James?" I froze, the mop handle slipping from my grasp. My breath caught in my throat. The voice, it was my name. My name. I strained my ears, looking around. The hallway was empty. There was no one there, not a soul. The voice, though, it seemed to hang in the air like a shadow, lingering just at the edge of my hearing. The sound was so soft, so insistent, that it almost felt like it was inside my head. "James," the voice repeated, almost a whisper in the air. I didn't move. My hands had turned clammy, my pulse pounding in my ears. Something was off. It wasn't the voice of a coworker. It wasn't even the sound of an intercom coming through. No, this was different. This was something deeper, something unnatural. And then, the voice came again, louder this time, as though it was now coming from the intercom system, its urgency rising like a silent scream. "James? Come here." My heart raced. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't dare move, but I knew the rules. I knew them by heart. Rule number 4. If you hear someone call your full name, do not respond. Run to the nearest greenlit room and lock the door. I couldn't hesitate. I couldn't think. My mind screamed at me to follow the rule. This wasn't just a voice, it was a trap, a lure meant to pull me deeper into the darkness of the building. But my body moved before my mind could catch up. My hands trembled as I abandoned my mop, the sound of the cart rattling behind me as I dashed toward the nearest greenlit room. The hallway stretched before me, endless and cold, the lights above flickering like they, too, were unsure of what was happening. My breath quickened, the air thick with the chill of the place, a bone-deep cold that wasn't normal. I sprinted as quickly as I could, every step feeling like it took me further away from safety. A small storage room at the far end of the hallway glowed with the familiar green light. I didn't hesitate. I slammed into the door with my shoulder, the cold metal biting into my skin. I locked it behind me, my hands shaking as I pressed my back to the door, my chest heaving with panic. The voice followed me. "James Nash? Why are you running?" The words were spoken with such calmness, such casual familiarity, that they made my stomach churn. It was as if the voice knew me, knew exactly what I would do, how I would react. My breath caught in my throat, and I realized that the voice wasn't just calling me anymore. It was tracking me, anticipating me. It wasn't just a person behind the intercom, it was something else, something darker. I reached for my ID badge, hoping that the light would offer me some sort of reassurance. The blue glow had been steady until now, but it flickered slightly as I pulled it from my pocket. Something about that light, it felt different tonight. It felt like it was pulsing in time with my racing heartbeat, as if it too was nervous, unsure of what was coming. The voice spoke again, closer now. "We only need your help with a small spill." The words hung in the air, laced with a sickening sweetness and unnatural calmness. But it was the voice that unsettled me most. It wasn't distant or mechanical like it had been before. It wasn't the voice of an intercom. No, this voice, it was almost human. Too human. It had changed, shifted, becoming more familiar, more personal. I knew that voice. I recognized it. But I couldn't place it. I couldn't remember where or when I'd heard it before. I pressed my back harder against the cold door, hoping the metal would ground me, keep me from spiraling. The small storage room was too tight, too cramped. I wanted out. I needed out. But there was nowhere to go. I glanced around the room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with cleaning supplies, storage bins, and chemicals I didn't want to even think about. Everything looked too normal, too ordinary, yet it felt completely wrong. I had followed the rules. I had done everything right. But this wasn't part of the protocol. This was something new, something that had never been mentioned in the manual. My hands shook as I held the badge in front of me, the faint blue light still flickering. Was it me, or was the glow growing more intense with each passing second? And then, the voice spoke again, this time from the other side of the door, so close I could almost feel its breath. "James, come out." My breath hitched. This wasn't just a voice anymore. It was something else, something alive. I took a step back, my hands still gripping the badge, my legs trembling beneath me. The room seemed to close in. There was no escape. No one could hear me. No one would come. But I had to do something. I could feel the weight of the door pressing against me, as though it were alive, pushing back, refusing to let me stay. The voice, no, whatever it was, wanted me to leave this room. It wanted to drag me back into the corridors, back into its reach. And I had no idea what would happen if I opened that door. The green light outside flickered again, but this time it wasn't reassuring. It was waiting. The door was waiting. The voice was waiting. The building was waiting. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. Whatever was happening wasn't just a voice. It was part of the facility, part of the system, and I had just realized that I had crossed a line. I wasn't just cleaning floors anymore. I wasn't just following the rules. I was being hunted, and this time I wasn't sure the rules would be enough to save me. The minutes dragged on, stretching into what felt like hours, and yet time seemed to slip through my fingers like water. I was stuck in that cramped storage room, the air thick and suffocating. The only light came from the cold, sterile emergency bulbs above me, casting eerie shadows against the walls. The faint blue light of my ID badge pulsed steadily in my hand, growing brighter with each passing second, as if it were alive, aware of my fear. I couldn't explain it, but there was something unnerving about that light. It didn't just glow, it called to me, urging me to leave the safety of the room and return to the unknown dangers lurking beyond the door. Something about it felt like a pull, a magnetic force drawing me in. The longer I stayed in the room, the more intense the pull became. But I had learned the hard way that you didn't ignore the rules. Rule number 1, if your badge changes color, leave immediately and find the nearest emergency exit. I couldn't ignore it any longer. My badge was no longer its usual calm blue, it was flashing red. Red, the color of an emergency. The warning signal. My heart dropped into my stomach and I felt the blood drain from my face. I had followed the rules to the letter, yet now they seemed like nothing more than a futile gesture against the growing horror. I knew I couldn't stay in the storage room much longer. If I didn't act, I would be caught in whatever trap was closing in on me. But where could I go? I was trapped. The voice, the same voice that had called my name, that had followed me, had now changed. It was inside my head, whispering, filling the empty space in my mind with fear. James, you've been chosen. I recoiled at the sound of my name, the whisper too close. I couldn't see the source. It didn't come from the intercom or from the hallway outside. It came from everywhere, a soft breath against my ear, like the facility itself was speaking to me. The words rattled through my mind, amplifying my panic. Chosen? What did that even mean? Why me? I had never been anything more than a janitor, a nameless, faceless part of the facility's machinery. So why had they chosen me? The realization hit me like a blow to the chest. They had been watching me. From the beginning, they knew what I was, who I was. I was nothing more than a pawn in their game. But what was the game? The walls of the storage room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. I had to move. I had to get out of here before the voice, it found me. My thoughts scattered as I scrambled to open the door, but the latch refused to cooperate. The door wouldn't budge. I pressed my palm against the cold metal surface, feeling a sickening heat crawl up my spine as the voice came again, this time more insistent, more human. We're waiting for you, James. My heart thundered in my chest as the meaning of the words sank in. This wasn't just some mistake. I wasn't accidentally involved. I was part of something larger. Something planned. But what? The pieces of the puzzle were slipping through my fingers, and the more I tried to hold onto them, the more elusive they became. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't breathe. I finally forced the door open and stepped into the hallway, my legs shaky beneath me. The hall was silent, eerily silent, but it didn't feel like relief. No, it felt like the calm before the storm. The flashing red light of my badge illuminated the sterile white walls as I moved down the corridor, the faint hum of the emergency lights the only sound in the oppressive stillness. The air was thick with tension, heavy as if the entire building were holding its breath. I wanted to run, to leave, to get as far away from here as possible, but something in my gut told me that running wouldn't save me anymore. Something was already here. I didn't know where to go. The hallways twisted in impossible directions, each corridor stretching into an endless labyrinth of metal doors and cold walls. No matter which direction I turned, I always felt like something was just behind me, lurking in the shadows. And then I heard it again. James? The whisper seemed to come from behind me, just out of reach, a voice so familiar yet distorted, too familiar, too close. I whirled around, panic tightening in my chest, but the hallway was empty. The voice didn't stop. It didn't care that I couldn't see it. It didn't care that I was running. James Nash? It whispered again, this time just above a breath, so close I could feel its presence in my bones. Don't you want to know the truth? The truth? I didn't know what it meant, but I couldn't stop myself from moving. The words felt like a dagger to the chest, and for a moment I was paralyzed by the fear of what was to come. What truth? What truth were they hiding from me? Before I could respond, the lights flickered. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but in a place like this, with its endless sterile hallways and cold, oppressive silence, it felt like the building was coming alive. The emergency lights above me flickered again, casting long shadows along the walls, stretching and warping as though the hallway itself were breathing, shifting. The whispering grew louder. You've been part of this from the start. You're not just a janitor. Not anymore. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But the words, they had a power over me. I couldn't resist. My feet carried me forward, driven by an unseen force, deeper into the heart of the facility. I had to find out. I had to know. The blue glow of my badge pulsed more urgently now, as if it had a will of its own. The red lights still flashed, but the call of that eerie glow, that unnatural presence, pushed me forward. The voice didn't stop. You're part of the project, James. You always were. And that was when I realized the horrific truth. The project wasn't just about containment or research or any of the explanations I had been fed. The project was about me. I was part of it. I had been chosen the moment I stepped foot into this place, the moment I had been hired. I wasn't just cleaning. I was being watched. I was the subject of some terrible, twisted experiment. And I was the key. But to what end? I reached the end of the hallway, my breath coming in shallow gasps as the voice continued to taunt me, pulling me deeper into the facility, toward whatever fate awaited me. The walls seemed to close in, the air thickening, suffocating, and I felt the walls of the building press against me, pushing me toward my destiny. There was no escape. Not anymore. My heart hammered in my chest as my mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding around me. The voice was still echoing in my ears, the whispers growing louder and more insistent, as if something was pulling me deeper into the facility. I could feel the cold from my ID badge, still pulsing with an unnatural blue light, and I knew I couldn't stay in the hallway much longer. My only choice, or so it seemed, was to move forward toward the cryogenics lab. But that wasn't supposed to be an option. The cryogenics lab was off limits. No janitor had ever set foot in there. The place was a mystery to me, a forbidden room that was always locked, its access tightly controlled by guards and scientists. The very thought of the lab, with its strange, frozen contents and the chilling rumors surrounding it, made my blood run cold. But tonight, when I stood in front of its door, it was wide open. The door beckoned me, inviting me into the unknown. The icy blue glow spilling out into the corridor sent a shiver crawling down my spine, and as I stepped closer, the temperature dropped sharply. The chill was unnatural, too cold, too sharp. It wasn't just the cold of the Alaskan night anymore. This felt different, as if the very air around me was alive, pulling me into the heart of whatever horrors lay within. My breath came out in sharp, visible puffs, freezing in the air before dissipating. The sound of my own heartbeat seemed to echo in my ears, each thud louder than the last as I reached for the door. A part of me screamed to turn back, to run as far from this place as possible, but I couldn't. The pull was too strong. The blue light, like a magnet, drew me closer with an almost hypnotic force. I stepped over the threshold into the lab, and instantly the temperature plunged even further. It was unbearable. My skin prickled with cold, my fingertips numb almost immediately. The lab was massive, stretching out in all directions, and I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on me. The only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigeration units, a mechanical, lifeless sound that seemed to pulse through the floor beneath me. And then I saw them. Rows upon rows of frozen containers lined the walls of the lab. Each one was sealed tight, marked with a series of numbers and symbols I couldn't understand. But it wasn't the containers that held my attention. It was what they contained, or what they didn't contain, that made my blood run cold. I couldn't see what was inside them, not clearly, but there was something in the air that told me I wasn't just looking at vials of research material. I could feel it, an unnatural presence in the room, a feeling that crawled along my skin and sank into my bones. Whatever was inside these containers had been trapped for a reason. My eyes were drawn toward the center of the room, where the largest container stood, a massive glass cylinder filled with a strange, glowing blue substance. The liquid inside was moving, shifting, though I could see no source of the motion. It rippled gently like a calm sea, but there was something about the movement that made me feel watched. The glow was mesmerizing, almost alive, its pulsing rhythm echoing in the back of my mind. Couldn't resist. My body moved before I could think, my hand reaching out toward the glass. Just as my fingers neared the surface, the voice spoke again, louder this time, cutting through the silence like a knife. "You shouldn't be here, James." The words boomed in my ear, close and unmistakable, and I jerked back, my heart leaping into my throat. The voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was as if it was alive, standing right beside me, coming from somewhere deep within the room. I spun around, but there was no one there. The lab was still, frozen in time, its lights flickering dimly overhead. The only movement was the ever-present glow of the blue liquid in the central container. For a moment, I stood frozen, my mind unable to process what I was hearing. My pulse thudded in my ears, my hands shaking as I tried to calm myself. What the hell was that? I had no answer, but the words echoed in my mind, reverberating like a warning. You shouldn't be here, James. The weight of those words pressed down on me, and I knew I was in deeper than I had ever been before. This wasn't just about following rules anymore. This wasn't about cleaning up or doing my job. This was about survival, my survival, and whatever had been locked away in this lab was a part of that. I took a hesitant step back, my eyes still fixed on the glowing cylinder. A sudden cold sweat ran down my back. I couldn't tell if it was the temperature in the room or if something more sinister was taking root in my mind, but I knew I couldn't stay in here much longer. The voice came again, though this time it was different, less a warning and more a command. You've seen it now, James. You can't leave. Not until you understand. The words echoed through my skull, rattling around with the frantic beat of my heart. The truth was coming at me fast, and I didn't know if I was ready for it. The cold wasn't just from the refrigeration. No, it was something else. Something older. Something that had been here long before I arrived. And it was calling to me, pulling me into its depths, waiting for me to uncover its secrets. As I stood there, frozen in place by fear, the glass cylinder began to hum, a low, vibrating sound that filled the room. The blue liquid inside stirred as if something within it was waking up. I had seen enough horror movies to know that this wasn't good. This wasn't just a lab. This was a prison for something that had no business being locked away. And now it was awake. It was watching me. I stepped back again, but my legs felt weak as if the air in the room had grown heavier, pressing me down. There was no escape. Not anymore. Whatever was inside the container, it wasn't just an experiment. It was a creature, a force of nature, and I had just made the mistake of unlocking its prison. My thoughts were a blur as I turned and stumbled toward the door. I had to get out. I had to leave this nightmare behind. But as my hand touched the door handle, the lights flickered again, and I heard the voice once more. Closer this time, almost inside my skull. You're not leaving, James. I froze, my hand still gripping the cold metal of the door handle. The words hung in the air, a final, chilling command. I knew then that I had made a terrible mistake. There was no escaping the cryogenics lab. There was no escaping what was locked away inside. And there was no escape from the horror that was waiting for me. My heart raced in my chest, pounding against my ribs as Dr. Emerson's face filled the screen above the cryogenic chamber. His eyes were wide, wild, unnaturally wide, as if they had been stretched open by some unseen force. There was no recognition in his expression, no warmth, no empathy. His face was cold, devoid of all human emotion, like a mannequin staring at me through the glass. I couldn't look away. The voice, distorted and tinny, crackled from the intercom, barely audible but filled with a sharp, cold command. I never conducted an orientation for you, James, he said, his tone flat, robotic. There was a tremor in his voice, but not one of fear or distress, just something unnatural, like a malfunctioning machine struggling to speak. You were never supposed to know about this place. The words landed like a punch to the gut. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of them, but everything inside me screamed that they couldn't be true. There had to be a mistake. I was just a janitor, a low-level employee, an invisible cog in the machine. I had no place here, no purpose other than to clean up after the real scientists, the ones who knew what was going on. But the truth was staring me in the face. I wasn't just cleaning. I wasn't just doing menial work. I had been a part of this all along. I had been here for far too long, and now I knew. I had been chosen. I had been carefully selected, like some kind of experiment, no, a test subject, to be drawn into whatever this place had been doing. The shock of it hit me like an avalanche, crushing every thought I had about what was happening. It was as if the floor had dropped out from beneath me and I was falling into a pit of terror that stretched infinitely downward. Dr. Emerson's words echoed in my head, drowning out everything else. This place, he had said. The facility wasn't a research center, wasn't a scientific institution. It was something else entirely. It was a containment facility. A prison. A prison for things far older, far more terrifying than I could ever imagine. The realization shattered my understanding of everything. The frozen containers, the glowing blue liquid, the eerie silence that permeated every hallway. I had only scratched the surface. I had thought it was a place for research, a facility studying ancient life forms or even cryogenic preservation. But now I understood. This wasn't a research project. This was a containment project. And I was knee-deep in it. What was inside those containers wasn't just frozen specimens. It wasn't merely research data or biological samples. It was something far worse. Something alive. And I was part of their twisted game. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and numb. How long had I been a pawn in their plan? How long had I been watched? Every step I had taken, every action had been monitored, controlled. And I had never known. I was just a janitor, a lowly maintenance worker, told to follow a set of rules, told to obey, to clean. But what had I really been cleaning? What had I really been walking past every day? I wasn't just cleaning up after experiments. I was a part of them. Dr. Emerson's face remained on the screen, his wide eyes locked onto mine as if waiting for me to comprehend the depth of my situation. His mouth barely moved as he continued speaking, his voice now carrying an edge of something darker, more sinister than before. You weren't supposed to know, he said, his voice growing colder with each word. This facility was never meant for you. You were never supposed to see what's in here. But now you have. And now there's no going back. I felt the world shift beneath me. The floor seemed to tilt, the walls closing in, pressing tighter around me with every passing second. My hands trembled uncontrollably at my sides, my breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps as I stared at the screen, unable to tear my eyes away from Dr. Emerson's gaze. What had I stumbled into? I thought back to all the strange rules, all the warnings that had been drilled into me. Rule number 1, if your badge changes color, leave immediately. Rule number 2, never enter rooms marked with a red triangle. Rule number 3, don't touch the clear liquid. Rule number 4, if someone calls your full name, run. They had been warnings not just for my safety, but for my sanity. They had been designed to protect me from what I was never meant to see. But it was too late. I had already seen it. I had already crossed the line. Dr. Emerson's expression didn't change. The voice, though still mechanical, was now tinged with something else. Something that made my stomach churn. You are part of this, James. You've always been. But now you're the key to it all. You'll understand soon enough. You'll see what we've been building. The chill in the air intensified. My skin felt like ice, my body moving in slow motion as the realization of his words sunk in. I was the key. What the hell did that mean? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was. I was no longer just a bystander. I wasn't just cleaning floors and mopping up spills. I was part of whatever dark, twisted plan had been set in motion the moment I stepped foot into this place. The rules weren't for my protection. They were there to control me, to keep me blind to the truth, to keep me from realizing what was really happening. And now that I knew, there was no turning back. I looked around the lab, my gaze falling once again on the rows of frozen containers, each one more ominous than the last. I could feel them now, the entities that had been trapped inside for God knows how long. They were alive. They were waiting, growing stronger with every passing second. And I was the one who had unwittingly brought them closer to freedom. You've made your choice, Dr. Emerson's voice came again, this time softer, almost soothing. Now you will help us complete what we've started. My legs buckled beneath me and I collapsed onto the cold floor of the lab, gasping for air, my mind struggling to piece together the truth. Help them? What was he talking about? I was nothing but a pawn, a cog in their machine, nothing more than a tool for their experiments. I had been chosen because I was disposable, because I was expendable. But I couldn't be a part of this. I couldn't be part of whatever nightmare this place had been hiding. I had to find a way out, to escape before it was too late. But the more I tried to push the thoughts away, the more the weight of my situation crushed me. There was no way out of here. I was part of it now. The realization was unbearable, suffocating. I had been dragged into this twisted scheme, and I didn't even know how or why. The walls of the cryogenics lab loomed closer. The hum of the machines around me felt like a death knell. And somewhere, deep within the lab, I felt the cold begin to spread even further. Someone was awakening. And this time I knew there was no escape. Fear surged through my body like a tidal wave, crashing over me, drowning me in the sheer magnitude of the danger I now faced. My heart raced, the pounding thudding in my ears as I turned and bolted for the door, my legs moving on instinct alone. Every step felt like a desperate attempt to outrun something much darker than myself. The air in the cryogenics lab was thick with terror, and I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out. I had to get out. But the walls were moving. I felt the facility closing in around me. A living, breathing entity. Its presence suffocating. Its intentions clear. The hallway stretched before me, longer than it had ever seemed, as though the very building had grown. Its corridors now labyrinthine, twisting in ways that made my mind spin. The ground beneath my feet trembled with a deep, rumbling force, as if the structure was alive, reacting to my flight. My shoes slid across the polished floor, each step more frantic than the last. I reached the door, the emergency exit, my hands shaking violently as I fumbled for the handle. But just as I grabbed it, I heard the voice again. "James Nash, you can't escape." It was a whisper at first, then a shout echoing from every corner of the hall, bouncing off the walls until it was coming from all around me. The sound was suffocating, wrapping itself around me like an invisible cord, pulling me back toward whatever horrors I had just witnessed in that lab. The voice was too familiar now, like a presence that had always been here, waiting, watching. It had been a part of me since the beginning, a shadow I couldn't escape. "You belong to us," the voice continued, its cold tone dripping with finality. The words stabbed through me, freezing my blood in my veins. I couldn't escape. The facility wasn't just a building. It was a trap. It was designed to contain, and now it had set its sights on me. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, but that was enough. The walls seemed to pulse with a strange, unnatural rhythm, pressing closer, the hallway narrowing as though the building itself was trying to squeeze the life out of me. I shoved the door open and stumbled out into the dark corridor. But something was wrong. The exit, the way out, was no longer just a door. It was part of the nightmare. The walls seemed to close around it, the floor shifting beneath my feet, pushing me in directions I didn't want to go. The voice spoke again, louder this time, its power vibrating through my bones, making my skin crawl. "James Nash, you are part of this. You can't run from what's already inside you." I didn't stop running. My mind was a blur, thoughts fragmented and spinning in chaos. The rules, the whispers, the cold blue glow, all of it slammed into me, and I couldn't make sense of any of it. But one thing was certain: I had to survive. I had to find a way out of this twisted nightmare. The facility was alive. The walls, the floors, the doors, they were all part of some greater design, and I was the one who had unknowingly triggered it. The further I ran, the tighter the grip seemed to become. It was like the building itself was alive, its machinery functioning not just to keep me inside, but to keep me in line. It had been watching, waiting for me to realize what I had become, a part of its plan. I could hear the sounds of movement behind me now, footsteps, heavy and rhythmic, but they weren't just my own. I wasn't alone. Something was following me. Something that was no longer human. The very air seemed to hum with energy, a buzzing force that vibrated through my bones. The facility had senses, like it could feel my every move, my every breath. I rounded a corner, my lungs burning, my legs threatening to give way beneath me. The blue glow from my badge flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows on the walls. My chest was tight with fear, but I couldn't stop. Not now. I had to keep moving. The voice returned, louder, more insistent, its words filled with that same cold certainty that froze me in place. "You belong to us, James. We've always known you would come." I wanted to scream, to break through the walls of this nightmare, but it felt impossible. The more I ran, the more the facility twisted, bending reality around me. Doors that should have led to exits led only to more corridors. The building was alive, and it wasn't letting me leave. I found myself back in a familiar hallway one I had crossed countless times. But this time, it was different. The walls were closer, the ceiling lower, and I could feel the pressure building, an invisible force pushing me into the ground. My breath came in ragged gasps, my pulse out of control. The voice was there again, insistent, suffocating. "Don't you understand, James? You were the key. You always were." The weight of the words slammed into me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just a janitor. I wasn't just cleaning up after experiments. I wasn't just living in this place. I was part of whatever this facility had been created for. And no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to escape, I would always be part of it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something else, something far worse, was waiting for me at the end of this hallway, something far beyond the voice that haunted me, something that had been waiting to emerge. I had been caught, not just in the facility's grasp, but in its purpose, its horrifying plan. The walls were too close now. I could feel the cold, the hum, the vibration of something shifting beneath the surface. There was no escape. And then the door at the end of the hallway opened. I didn't have time to process it. The door just opened, its hinges creaking as though it had been waiting for me. The space beyond was dark, a pit of shadows that I couldn't see into. But I didn't care. I ran toward it, my body moving on sheer panic, driven by the single thought that I needed to escape this nightmare, whatever it took. But as I stepped into the darkness, I heard the voice one last time. Louder, more insistent, like the very air was now speaking to me. "You can't run, James. You can never escape. You are one of us." The door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. Forever. The storm outside howled like a wounded animal, clawing at the helicopter's metal skin as I climbed aboard. Snow and ice cut through the air like daggers, slicing into my face and stinging my eyes. The wind howled with unnatural force, twisting around the helicopter, pressing against it as though it were alive. I could barely keep my footing on the landing pad, the snow so deep, so thick, that every step felt like it was dragging me under. The helicopter's blades whipped violently through the air, the sound deafening in the chaos of the storm. I had never felt more vulnerable than I did in that moment, standing on the edge of something I couldn't fully comprehend. The whole world felt like it was on the brink of collapsing, and I was just a speck, a tiny part of a much bigger, much darker reality. The helicopter's door slammed shut behind me, sealing me in the small, claustrophobic space. As the engine roared to life, I could feel my heartbeat thumping in my ears. The snow and ice clung to the windows, but I couldn't take my eyes off the facility below as it slowly receded into the distance. But something felt wrong. We climbed higher, banking sharply to avoid the craggy mountain peaks, the churning storm clouds around us more oppressive the further we ascended. My gaze drifted down to the now visible dome of ice that had formed around the facility, slowly encasing it in a frozen cocoon. I had seen the facility from the outside before, but never like this. The dome, vast and expansive, was growing larger with every passing moment, spreading outward like a massive, creeping frost. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The entities weren't contained. They weren't just trapped in the ice, they were the ice. I felt a cold, primal fear settle deep in my chest as I watched the facility shrink below me, swallowed by the ever-expanding dome. The ice wasn't just a barrier, it was alive. The creatures I had thought were contained, locked away in the frozen chambers below the surface, were using the ice itself as a conduit. It was their medium, their vessel, spreading and adapting with each passing moment. What had started as something small, isolated, was now turning into something that could overtake the entire landscape. And that's when I realized the worst part. They were following me. The thought sent a wave of nausea through me. The blue glow from my ID badge, still in my pocket, pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to mirror my racing heart. I could feel the cold seeping deeper into my skin, into my bones. The helicopter's steady hum felt hollow now, like the sound was reverberating off the ice beneath us, amplifying everything around us, suffocating us in the cold. I looked out the window, the wind slamming against the glass. The ice dome was stretching farther, growing larger, reaching out like a living organism. The more I looked at it, the more it seemed as though the very air around it was alive, moving, adapting, feeding off the cold and the darkness. The ice wasn't just spreading, it was growing, and everything it touched, it absorbed. The dome had begun to take on a life of its own, one that was connected to the entities inside, their influence extending far beyond the facility. I couldn't help but think of the words that had haunted me for so long. You belong to us. The voice that had followed me, that had stalked me through every corner of that hellish facility, had been right. The entities were no longer contained within the ice. They had become the ice. The longer we flew, the more I realized they weren't just waiting for something. They were spreading, evolving. The very fabric of the land around the facility was now intertwined with whatever had been locked away inside those chambers. They had adapted, growing stronger with every moment, and now they were free. The helicopter banked again, but I wasn't paying attention to the pilot's movements anymore. I was focused on the ground below, watching in horror as the snowstorm seemed to pulse, as though the ice were calling to the storm, drawing it closer. The edges of the ice dome were jagged, but they seemed to be spreading, slowly at first, then more quickly. It was a slow-moving catastrophe, but I could see it clearly now. The very earth beneath us was being consumed by it. Do you see it? The voice echoed in my head again, soft but firm, like it was speaking directly into my soul. It's already begun. The ice is us, and we are everywhere. I gripped the armrest, my knuckles white. There was nothing I could do. The facility was gone. The ice had taken it, and it was taking everything around it. It wasn't just the building that was in danger. It was the entire region. It was the world. The entities had escaped the facility, and now they were spreading out into the vast, frozen wasteland, expanding outward, consuming everything in their path. The helicopter veered off course, cutting through the storm with a violent jerk, the noise of the rotor blades cutting through the thick air. I didn't even notice the pilot's voice over the intercom, trying to communicate with someone. My mind was reeling, my stomach in knots. It didn't matter where we were going now. The entities were free, and they would find us. They would find me. I had triggered something far bigger than myself, and there was no turning back. The ground beneath us began to shimmer, the edges of the dome growing sharper, its lines more defined. The ice was creeping up the mountains, closing in on every direction. And as I looked out of the helicopter's window, I could see it, the ice, growing, moving, creeping into the surrounding wilderness. It was spreading faster than I could have ever imagined. You were already ours. The voice was everywhere now, surrounding me, suffocating me. The ice has already consumed this land, James. It's only a matter of time before it reaches everywhere. The panic surged in me, my breath coming in sharp bursts. I had been a part of it all along, whether I had known it or not, whether I had wanted it or not. The ice, the creatures inside it, they were the real force, and everything else was just a stepping stone to their ultimate goal, total, unrelenting domination. They weren't just part of this land, they were the land. The snowstorm, the mountains, the ice, the sky, they were all connected to the creatures that had been trapped for so long. I thought I could escape. I thought I could outrun them. But now I understood the horrifying truth. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere left to hide. The ice had already claimed the world, and it was only a matter of time before it claimed me too. The air inside the helicopter felt suffocating, the hum of the rotors above cutting through the icy winds outside. As I sat there, staring out the window at the swirling snow beneath us, the realization settled deep into my gut. I wasn't sure if it was the churning storm or the weight of the truth that made my stomach churn, but I couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling of doom that pressed against my chest. The truth was far worse than anything I had ever imagined. The entities that had been trapped within the icy walls of that facility, the ones I had thought were simply ancient, frozen beings, were far more than that. They weren't just ancient, they were something far older, far more insidious. They had been influencing humanity for millennia, weaving their presence into the very fabric of our existence. They had never truly been trapped in the ice. No, they had been manipulating us, shaping our world, guiding us in ways we could never understand. They were part of the story of humanity, a shadow that had always been there, just out of sight. I didn't know how far back it went, how long they had been influencing the course of human history. I didn't know if anyone had ever realized it, if anyone had ever suspected. But now, as the snowstorm raged below us, I understood the scope of the horror. These beings weren't confined to the frozen lab I had stumbled upon. They were everywhere. They had been there since the beginning, shaping the course of civilization, guiding humanity down paths we could never have guessed. The facility, the place I had thought was the heart of this nightmare, was just the beginning. The ice was vast, spreading far beyond the walls of the research station. The more I looked out at the endless snow, the more I realized that the entities weren't just confined to that small corner of the world. They were scattered across the globe, hidden beneath mountains, buried in the deepest caves, frozen in the coldest reaches of the earth. And they had been growing stronger with every passing year, adapting to our world, feeding off the darkness and isolation we had built around them. The rules I had followed, the warnings that had been drilled into me, they weren't just arbitrary. They were part of something bigger, a plan that had been set in motion long before I ever stepped foot in that facility. Every strange behavior, every odd rule, every unexplainable event was a piece of the puzzle. They had known how to keep us in line, how to manipulate us, how to make sure we never saw the bigger picture. And now I was part of it. I was just another piece in their twisted game, and there was no way out. They had always been there, always watching, always waiting for the right moment to make their move. I turned my gaze back to the helicopter window, my breath fogging up the glass as I stared at the endless white below. The swirling snow seemed to reach up to meet us, as if the storm itself was a living thing, feeding off the presence of the entities. The helicopter dipped lower, slicing through the storm with no destination in mind. It didn't matter where we were headed anymore. I had learned that lesson too late. There was nowhere to hide from this. The entities weren't just content with being hidden in the ice. They had used the isolation of the Arctic to incubate, to grow, to spread. They had become part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of the earth. They had always been here, shaping our world, manipulating us from the shadows. And now they were free. Free to roam, free to expand, free to reclaim what they had lost. As the helicopter flew further into the storm, I understood the full extent of the horror. There was no containment. There was no way to stop them. The rules, the research, the warnings, everything had been part of a larger scheme to prepare for this moment. They had been waiting for someone like me, someone who could unravel the truth, who could see what they had been building. And I had fallen right into their trap. I leaned back in my seat, my hands shaking as the realization settled deeper into my bones. It was too late. There was no hope. The entities were free, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. They had been manipulating humanity from the very beginning, pulling the strings, shaping our actions, our decisions. They were the force behind the darkness in our world, the cold, the isolation, the fear. They were the ones who had created the rules, who had made sure we followed them without question. Now, as I sat in that helicopter, drifting further into the storm, I knew I was no longer just a pawn in their game. I was their witness. I was the one who had uncovered the truth, the one who would bear the weight of it, the one who would carry the knowledge of their existence. The world below me was changing, twisting, folding in on itself. The ice was spreading, covering the earth like a blanket, suffocating everything in its path. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, the wind howling with the voices of the entities, carrying their whispers through the air, through the very fabric of the earth. They were everywhere, and there was nothing left to stop them. The truth had been revealed, and it was far worse than anything I had ever imagined. And now I was trapped in the center of it all. The entities were free. The world was theirs. And there was nothing left but the endless, cold darkness of their grip. The truth, once discovered, becomes a prison. One you can never escape from. The entities that have been hidden away for millennia are no longer confined to the cold, icy depths of the earth. They've spread, they've adapted, and now they are everywhere. They've shaped our world in ways we'll never understand, manipulating humanity like puppets on strings. And as terrifying as it is, it's too late to stop them. We think we control our fate, but sometimes we're just pawns in something much bigger, something ancient and far more powerful than we could ever imagine. As the last remnants of hope slip away, the question remains, can we survive what's already been set in motion, or are we just waiting for the inevitable? What would you do if you found yourself trapped in a nightmare like this? Would you run, or would you accept the chilling truth that you're already part of it? Thank you for joining us tonight at True Scary Stories. If this story has left you with questions or more nightmares, remember, you're never alone. There are far more terrifying stories waiting to be uncovered. Stay tuned for more, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You never know what horror might be lurking just beneath the surface.